Catus Maximus here, this time with a quick review of the Apollo ratcheting PVC pipe and plastic pipe hose and tubing cutter. I was looking around on YouTube and there's quite a few reviews of various plastic hose and pipe cutters, but I really searched and I could not find any reviews actually of this specific unit. There's various complaints of the various types of these ratcheting PVC pipe and hose cutters. And there are some design features that make some better and some worse. There's also a vast disparity in the price. Some of these things can run $50 or more. And this is all involving, the mechanical ratcheting style. Companies like Milwaukee have a power tool, which is a power version of one of these. And I can imagine it was pretty nice. When it comes to these, some of the issues that people have is either just ease of use and functionality, or physical build quality, or actual issues in using them, particularly, I wouldn't say cutting accuracy, but where the blade, when you're cutting, tends to want to deflect. Now, of the various styles, there are these ratcheting styles. There are ones that are the more expensive, like rigid, etc., which makes these $50 ones, which are either compound or just single action kind of blade, kind of like these, where they're just a single action where you just use the raw leverage to cut the PVC pipe. These here are more for radiator hoses and soft tubing, but there's heavy duty versions just for cutting PVC pipe, but they can be a lot of effort to use, particularly if you actually do work with PVC for a living, say doing installs on new houses, and you're going to be doing 50 to 100 cuts a day. It can be a big deal. So that's hence the reasoning behind the ratcheting versions is PVC and other plastics are pretty dense. So instead of trying to cut it in one motion just using long handles, this does it in small little steps, and so you have more overall handle pressing, but it gives you lots of extra leverage. Now, some of the issues with many styles of PVC and tubing cutters that look similar to this have various issues. Some don't drive the blade via the center, i.e. the ratchet mechanism. It's just not one piece, and so that's a big deal. When they're driven from one side or the other, they're never quite made strong enough. So the blade tends to want to deflect from one side to the other. Part of that's technique. When you operate these, you do have to kind of concentrate and make sure that you're actually really square onto the pipe. And it's actually a little bit harder than it seems. It's just so easy to get it off a little bit one way or a little bit the other, and then it wants to cut at a slant. And on cheap ones, the blade actually wants to impact part of its own receiving end or shoe. These are rated for 1 1/4 inch. And to compare, here's some orbits. Now these are the quote-unquote nicer version. There's many styles that are like these orbits, but are actually much more poorly made. The orbit one is the actual halfway decent Taiwanese version of these. And these things tend to run about $10. This Apollo online is still sold, and it's about $20, and I will include the part number. So on a traditional version, one of the big issues people have is that they don't have a spring on the handle. And then the second thing is when you need to open it up, you have to grab it, pull it like that, and then you can ratchet it. And usually if it's pointing downwards in this fashion, gravity will hold it. But if you're upwards, then it doesn't really want to work very well. And so you just ratchet down, and each step you get a lot of force. And on one of these, it clicks over when you reach the end. So even these orbits that are a bit cheaper are still driven via the center of the blade, so it actually wants to cut. When you get it square in the tube, it wants to drive right through, and you don't have any issues with the blade diving off one side or the other. There's been some reviews online, not of only these, but these kind of tools where the blades are pretty easy to damage, and they're actually sharpened razor sharp to get through the plastic and tubing nice and easily. If there's anything with like fiber reinforcing, I'll demonstrate it cuts that nicely as well. And so they have like a razor edge, so you have to be extremely careful with them, but it also makes that edge very, very delicate. Even if you cut copper wire with these, you can damage the very fine edge. Fortunately, they have quite a bit of overset. Overset means how much the blade travels into the slot. So you can actually, since it's just a piece of metal and one little bolt holding them, you can pull these blades out and easily resharpen them a few times. And like on this Apollo, they make it pretty easy to order a replacement blade, and I'll include the replacement blade part number as well. What's nice is actually I ran into these as completely randomly at a thrift store and had been familiar with these cutters and noticed that these seem to be a much different than many other brands. Let's finally get into demonstrating these 5 minutes into the video. Let me zoom out a little bit. What sets the Apollos apart is several things. They do have a handle. It is a spring-loaded handle, so they have a nice little lock. But the one feature is it's all a cast aluminum body. It's not plastic, so you have nice rigid handles and nice through rivets that are all either E-clipped or screwed, so it can be rebuilt if you so desire. The upper section is actually 2 pieces of aluminum that are screwed and fastened together, where it's a one-piece handle. But really what makes these Apollos the best, and why I'm going to put in the description one of the best PVC cutters, is their true one-handed operation. You just grab them and they have a little taper on the hook, so you can just squeeze the handle and it releases the hook for you. And it is spring loaded, but that's due to the design of the ratchet mechanism. Actually pushes the handle away, so even if you're using this upside down, you have a nice spring loaded handle. The second thing that makes it so nice is the blade release and having a spring-loaded blade. So you can actually have, your pipe or whatever in your hand and then realize, oh, these aren't open. And on the similar, the cheaper style, you have to use 2 hands to open them up or fidget with them. These you can just pick up in a closed position, grab that, and then they have a spring-loaded release where the blade just comes right up, and then you go ahead and ratchet it down. Another nice feature about this is under certain types of materials, particularly cutting hose, or especially heavy-duty hose, not steel reinforced, but fiber reinforced hose, some grades of hydraulic hose, etc., is that they'll be very springy. And one of the issues with more traditional ones, and let me bring these back out, these are the same way the ridges are, is if you're ratcheting down and it has a springy material that will push back up on the blade, it will push the blade back and you won't actually get any ratcheting action. The blade will just kind of go up and down and you'll kind of have to fiddle with it, and it can make it a bit of a hassle. What's really nice and kind of sets this Apollo apart, besides just the one-handed operation, is as you ratchet it up, let me zoom in right here, it actually has a second pawl that holds the blade, just like a come-along does, where it has 2 ratchets, one to operate and then one to hold. So when you ratchet down the blade, this little clip here, or this second pawl, holds the blade. So even if you're trying to cut rope or anything like that, where it has a springiness, it will still cut right through it, because each time you ratchet the blade, it is held there. And that one feature has actually been pretty amazing. Another nice feature, and I should show this when I open it back up, is to compare the fineness of the ratchet teeth. And let's see if I can really show this, but what you can see here is that the ratchet teeth are actually quite a bit smaller, or I should say finer. There's more of them on the Apollo than there is, say, on this Orbit. And that's really nice because you're actually not having to open your hand as wide, and it takes you a couple more steps to go ahead and get it ratcheted down. But it means less fatigue because you have more leverage. It's nicer when you're cutting, especially PVC, which is a pretty hard plastic. And I really appreciated that feature. So that's kind of the quick overview and review of the Apollo. I'll do a little demonstration cut here. What we have here is a decent example. This is not PVC pipe, but what this is heavy-duty double wall triple reinforced silicone hose. This would be semi-truck or big diesel truck rated coolant hose, and for various other applications, but this is just known as being the very heavy-duty hose. If you ever use hose of this grade on your automobile, it would last pretty much the life of the vehicle, especially if you use the special kind of Oetiker hose clamps. And someday I'll get into Oetiker hose clamps. I do have some crimpers. But with the Apollos, if you have a hose, you just pick this up, grab the handle, release it, and then the real concentration is to really get a nice eye to make sure that you're going to cut that real center. You just want that, and it's actually a little bit funky. It's a little harder than it seems to actually get the blade right on center. Unfortunately, it's held pretty rigid, and then we just start cutting. And voila. And you can see that the Apollo actually, when you make sure to hold it square, it actually cuts a fairly square cut. It's also, the blade is nice and sharp, and you can see because it cut through all that, I believe it's fiberglass, all that fiberglass reinforcing without leaving a bunch of nasty hairs or anything getting pulled out. A couple quick things before I forget is, one, on this, they do have 2 slots. So if you're cutting some stuff that's really small, you can put it in the back slot, and then larger objects go in the front slot. The only real drawback, as far as I can tell, is, I mean, for $20, the build quality is actually great. I really like the rough paint that they put on the aluminum. That's a nice feature. And these really work surprisingly well. The one caveat to these is that release, and due to the way it works, doesn't really like to operate when the blade is in the middle position. It really has a hard time kind of releasing the blade. It really likes to have it all the way down before you release it. Now, you can get it to work, but a lot of times you have to press it pretty hard to actually get it to work in the middle position. It's just a little bit more funky because you really have to put a lot of extra strength to push it out of the pawls, where when it's all the way down in the closed position, this pawl is already kind of on a blank space, so it makes it real soft and easy. And so it does, I guess it does work in the middle positions. It's just surprising because you have to press it like twice as hard to get the blade to release mid-cut versus when it's at the bottom. Now, let's try that a little comparison with the orbits on the same piece of hose. It's a little bit big for these orbits. These are only rated for 1 inch. And that's as far as we're getting. See that? The hose just makes the blade bounce back, and effectively you can't cut it. And that's actually a surprising aspect of these kind of cutters, is how that can affect you so much, because most of the time I actually use these for cutting soft products like this, and none of them worked until I was using other cutters until I found these, and then these just made it really nice. Just no problem, a nice clean cut every time. If you really kind of make sure to align the blade, really I look down the blade and make sure it's aligned with the slot, you really get nice square cuts. So anyway, that was kind of the quick or not so quick review and overview of the Apollo professional. I would call these professional PVC pipe cutters. As far as all the ones that are out there, these do qualify as being for professional. They work well, they seem to be well built, and they have proper features, especially considering the entirely one-handed operation and the double ratchet pawl for cutting soft products does set these clearly apart from any of the other ones, really, by a variety of different features. Anyway, I really appreciate everybody watching, and I will do a comparison of various hosing and PVC pipe cutters. I have a few different versions, so we'll do that in the next video and include these with that. But I really appreciate you all watching. If you haven't subscribed, please do subscribe. Catus Maximus out.